Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this is the third installment of Chapter 2. Talking about dependents. So in a part of your chapter, they talk about these exemptions, and I mentioned them in the expanded tax formula. So exemptions in the expanded tax formula were one of the deductions from AGI. Remember, adjusted gross income, that famous milestone on your individual tax return and your 1040 that helps us determine a number of ceilings and floors. They also use that number for phase outs. I guess as far as like there are any tax benefits you start losing as your income gets higher. They use the AGI for determinations of how you lose those benefits, okay, as your income gets higher. Okay, exemptions. So what are these? Okay, so prior to 2018, we had these exemptions that we would get for every person reported on the return. And they would approximate $4,000, okay, per person. So if you were a family of 4, you would get one for you, one for your spouse, one for each of your dependent children. And so that's a $16,000 in deductions. Well, now, beginning in 18, that's going away. We no longer get this $4,000 per person. So what have they done? They've increased the standard deduction that you get depending on your filing status. And they've also increased the credits you get for children and certain dependents. So that's kind of how they've offset the loss of these exemption amounts. They've given us higher standard deductions, and they've increased some credits for certain dependents. That's how they've tried to so to speak balance it out. All right. So remember, your book talks about these approximate $4,000 per person, but beginning in 2018 they're going away. Now, I don't make you memorize the exemption amounts, so if you need those for a calculation on your test, you'll be given those. It'll say, okay, for this tax year, the deduction for exemptions is this much per person. So you don't have to memorize that. But as far as determining if we can qualify to take, claim dependence on a return, that is still relevant because you get credits rather than these exemption amounts for certain dependents. The dependency rules are still relevant. So we'll go over those right now. So I'm going to add a page here to get a clean slate. Basically, 2 sets of rules. Qualifying child, which I'm going to abbreviate QC, and qualifying relative, I'll abbreviate QR. Now, under either set of rules, there are 3 general qualifications that must be met, but 3 general tests. So, the first one, dependent taxpayer test. Now, what is that? So, can they be claimed by anybody else? Okay, you want to make sure that you actually have the right to claim that person. Okay, so that's the one thing. And then the married filing joint test. Basically, that says they can't be a joint filer if you're going to claim them as a dependent unless they're only filing to get some refund that they're entitled to, some withholding. So, like, say that they had a part-time job for a few weeks, a burger joint, and they had a little bit of withholding taken out of their checks, and they know they're not going to owe any tax, and so they just want to get that withholding back. That's one exception to that rule, but in general, they can't file jointly. And then the third one that applies to both sets of rules is the citizen or residency test, and that in general it basically applies to USA, Mexico, and Canada. Oh, Canada! I don't know the Canada anthem. I've just heard it uttered, like pieces of it, in some shows and stuff. So USA, Mexico, and Canada. They have to be a resident of one of those countries, and I imagine that has to do with the NAFTA treaty. So other than that, I have no idea. Being on the same, I guess we're all on the same continent. That's one other thing that has something to do there. So yeah, so there. Those three tests under either set of rules, those have to be met. Alright, let's talk about the qualifying child. So, first test under qualifying child, other than these three that apply to both. Relationship. And they give you a list in your textbook. So, child. And that could be your adopted child, your stepchild, doesn't matter. So I'm going to lump those all in the same category. Your book actually does 3 separate bullet points for those, but I'm just saying, okay, child, your natural child, a stepchild, or a foster child. Okay, adopted, something like that. And then I'm just going to add and descendants. So that means they can be children of your children, grandchildren of your children. So just any descendants of your children, and including your children. Those are all fine. And then the other relationship are siblings, and it could be half siblings, step siblings. Really doesn't matter. And then we'll also put in parentheses and descendants. That's relationship tests. Now the second one is age. Basically, we've got 2 age thresholds. There's under 19 or under 24 if they're a full-time student. Okay? And then they also have this permanently disabled, regardless of age. So it doesn't matter how old they are if they're permanently disabled. If they're incapable of caring for themselves, then you can claim them as a qualifying child if they meet the relationship test and the other tests. Okay. And next test, the residency test. So that's basically more than 1/2 of the year they live with you. So they have an exception to that if they're out at school. Like say that, okay, they live with you, but they're off studying at college every semester. They're still considered to be living with you and they meet the residency test. Or if they're in the hospital for several months, or if they go on vacation or they go out to the military, they can still be considered to be living with you, but in general they just have to live with you for over half the year, unless one of those exceptions applies. Support. Basically, it's just not self-supporting. Okay? Not self-supporting. So where does this come into play? Well, if, let's say that 2 parents get divorced, and so one spouse has custodianship of the child, but doesn't make as much money as the spouse who doesn't have custodianship. So even though one of the spouses doesn't make that much money, but has custody of the child, and that maybe that spouse is receiving a large portion in child support, so say they get a huge child support payment from the ex-spouse who doesn't have custodian of the children, the spouse making less money with all the child support can still claim them as a dependent Okay, so that's an example of where the not self-supporting comes into play. It's because even though we don't provide the majority of the child support, in this case, I can still, if I'm the divorced parent making less money collecting child support, I can still claim the child as my dependent. So where I wouldn't be able to do it is if the child was making a lot of money. Let's say they became an actor on some TV show and they were making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and so basically they could support themselves if they wanted to. But if they put all that money away and didn't spend any of it on themselves, and they were just depending on my support, then that would still work. Okay, so they can make a lot of money so long as they don't spend that money on themselves in terms of like their support stuff. Then if they just put it away in savings, then this would still work. Okay, so even if they make a lot of money, if they're not spending the money on themselves, if they're putting it away in savings, and they're just they're living off their parents, it'll still work. Okay, and I'm gonna skip the special test of qualifying child of more than one taxpayer. Just know that the IRS uses tiebreaker rules to determine who gets to claim the child if they can be a dependent of more than one taxpayer. Okay. All right. Now let's look at the qualifying relative rules. First off, they don't meet the qualifying child. So they don't meet the qualifying child test. So you want to go through the qualifying children test first, and then eliminate that possibility. And then the next one is relationship or member of household. Okay, and I just abbreviated household with 2 H's. Now, the main thing about relationship is for some reason they don't include cousins in the relationship test. So if you're going to claim a cousin as a dependent, they would have to be a member of your household. Okay, because cousins don't get included in the relationship test for qualifying relative. A good way to remember it is no kissing cousins. That's what another professor taught me. No kissing cousins. So if you look at the relationship list in your textbook, it's more comprehensive than the one under qualifying child. So it still has the child or descendant of, stepchildren, foster children. It still has the siblings, but then it goes on to include okay, you can include your parents in this one, and then your aunts and your uncles, and then some in-laws can also apply in here. So you can see the relationship test is more comprehensive than for the qualifying child. But if they don't meet one of those under the more comprehensive relationship test, and remember cousins, no kissing cousins, they have to be a member of the household. So if you have a freeloading friend, if you're supporting them and they meet the other tests and they're living with you, they're a member of your household, then you can claim freeloading friend. Next thing we've got here is a gross income test. Now, that is basically less than the exemption amount. Which approximates the $4,000. So if they make less than $4,000 per year, then they meet the gross income test. Now that they're taking the exemptions away, I'm not sure how that's going to play out with the gross income test. We'll just have to see. But just remember, for now, it's if they make less than $4,000 a year, they meet the gross income test. And then the support test So you're providing more than 1/2 of their support. Now, just to contrast that with qualifying child, is just that the qualifying child is not self-supporting. You don't necessarily have to be providing more than half of their support. Okay, so they could have their support coming from other areas and still be a qualifying child. They just can't be providing more than half of their own. Now, for qualifying relative, you actually have to be providing, specifically you, providing more than half of the support of that person. Like if your parents, like say that you got your parents staying in a nursing home or something like that, and you're covering over 50% of it, then yeah, you're covering more than half of their support. Yay! This is fantastic, I'm telling you. Just making sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah, well, that sounds fantastic. So I think we're going to stop here for this video segment. I'll upload it to YouTube. And just in case you're a little confused, I'm using my wife's device to record these videos because it's got this neat little pen thing. It's a Samsung Galaxy Note. And so when I upload it to YouTube, it's linked to her Gmail account. So if you see like the name underneath it, it's got my wife's name, Fiorella Thibodeau. I don't want that to confuse y'all. It's really my videos, but it just using her account because I like her device. It's really nice. It's lovely. Okay, talk to you soon.